You're listening to Bold Calling, an award-winning podcast presented by Orum, where every episode we're bringing on the biggest and brightest minds in the tech and sales industries for a discussion about their biggest challenges and the unique ways they're working to solve them. I'm your host, Adam Sokol, and today I am joined by Brattin, SDR manager here at Orum, and John Karsant, founder and CEO of Level Up Leads. John, thank you both so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Adam.
Absolutely. So, keeping with the theme of this season, I have brought on two subject matter experts. This particular episode will be all about SDR management and kind of how to get the most out of your SDRs that you're working with. And I want to start, John, I'll just dive right in and ask you the first question. We're going to kind of go back and forth talking about talent acquisition and retention and AI and moving up market, all sorts of stuff. But the first question I want to ask you is, what are the most effective strategies for onboarding and training new SDRs so they can ramp up quickly?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the challenges I found is actually judging SDR talent, and it's very difficult to know until they start. So I'm talking specifically by interviews. I found to be proven wrong many times in who I thought was a good fit, who I didn't think was a good fit. But I think once you start onboarding them and actually give them a chance to understand how your company works, expectations. But for us, we're really heavy on the phones with the SDRs. So the best thing to do is start getting them on the phones. So you can actually start coaching them. What we typically do internally is have them call for Level Up Leads internally first for practice before they actually start calling on a client, because we're an agency. So that allows us to coach and train them and get them up to speed.
I imagine, because you're an agency, are you guys bringing on SDRs fairly frequently? So I'd imagine you probably have to have some pretty clean and comfortable training to make sure that they are ramping up pretty succinctly.
Yep. Yeah, it depends a little bit on client flow, but yeah, typically a few a month.
We're not bringing on quite that many SDRs every single month here at Orum, but what, in your experience as a manager, how do you think about effective strategies for onboarding and getting them ramped up quickly?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing is always understanding what is their learning style. So do they like more hands-on? Do they like to shadow? Do they like classroom learning? Kind of what is their learning style? And from there, I have kind of a playbook that I've created for like onboarding and follow it, but we can adjust based off of what they need. So if they need more one-on-one time with me or like a fellow rep, I'm happy to schedule that. A lot of it is shadowing, basically, who's really great at something. So if somebody's good at LinkedIn social selling, I'm probably going to pair them with that person and say, hey, take this like social selling course with one of our SDRs that, does that. Or if somebody is really great at objection handling, hey, let's have you work with the team. But that also makes them feel like they're part of a team significantly quicker. And I really like doing that. We have an onboarding doc that they go through, and it's like, hey, week 1, here's what you're doing. Week 2, follow this guideline, but we're very flexible. But the biggest thing is a lot of it is transparency and understanding how people learn. I'm a visual learner. I need to be one-on-one, like hands-on. And then that might not work for everybody, and that's okay. But I've also found that kind of ripping off that Band-Aid is really important. So like the faster we get you on the phones, the faster you're going to get comfortable. And it's okay to make mistakes. So I kind of like that learning style too. It's like, hey, here's a script. Kind of go make it your own if you need to. What did you learn from these calls? What do you want to do better? And I think people get more comfortable quickly because people can be very hesitant to hit the phones. Kind of like what John said, we don't know what their experience is like. So how comfortable are they hitting the phones early and often and learning from those experiences too? So I do kind of a combination with onboarding.
That's so important. What you mentioned, Airly, is sometimes people will be a little hesitant to talk directly with the person that hired them or their training manager. But if you can get them shadowing, kind of get you out of the picture, they can maybe ask more questions and shadow SDRs. And one thing that we've done internally, since we have roughly 25, is we have SDR team leads. And so they automatically get added to a team with other SDRs and an SDR team lead, so they can start training under them in a sense and start feeling like they can talk to their peers easier, because sometimes we found they're a little shy or nervous talking to their boss.
Yeah. A lot of like was about, oh, maybe I should know this, but I don't know this. And I don't want to tell my manager that I don't understand this. Like, somebody come help me. So it's so good to have a team leader calling that can really help with that too.
It's so funny because we all every single one of us in every single role always says like, there's no dumb questions. But if you are talking to your manager, you're like, no, this feels like a dumb question. I got to find someone else to ask this to. Yeah. I want to ask you both about measuring performance. In the fall of 2024, we released our State of Sales Development report. And one of the questions we asked was, as managers, leaders, how are you measuring performance? Is it activity-based? Is it, close one? And so I'm curious, and John, we'll start with you. How do you measure performance, like actual success for your team?
So we're definitely faced with challenges on this front because all our clients are so different. So from small startups to publicly traded companies, and expectations, even by the client, is drastically different. So it's a little challenging. If the client can give us some type of expectations, or like they've done some of that work outreach before, it's easier to set those expectations internally. But if they haven't, it's kind of like you're doing a little bit of guesswork until you start getting some traction. But to answer your question directly, it's a combination of actually activity, like how many calls are being made, meetings set, good conversations. Like even if it doesn't lead to a meeting, like are they interested? Do they want some information for later? And then are they doing the basic things, like are they going off script, or are they sounding like too much like a robot, like some other things, just like are they able to do some basic things like data entry? But the most important things are the dials, the meetings, and the conversations.
Hey, Riley, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with John. And, I think before, when I started my SDR career, like 2021, it was like just volume. How many people can we talk to? How many conversations can we have? How many meetings can we set? And I think now we're moving more towards a revenue model where it's more important about the quality of these meetings that we're setting and who we're talking to and how we're building relationships with, prospective clients. And I think that has drastically changed, where people were maybe making 300, 400 dials a day, whereas now we're making closer to maybe 150 or 100, but account selection is a lot different. So for me, a lot of it is basing it off of account selection. Are we picking good accounts? Are we picking good contacts? What do these conversations look like? And are you effectively getting better every time you face an objection? Like I measure success based off of that too. So if I notice that Sally maybe was having a hard time overcoming this objection last week, and her conversion was low on that, and then I see the following week that after we had one-on-ones and did role plays, her conversion changed a little bit. Like that's a win in my book too. And like I measure that as well because they're effectively getting better. Sales is so up and down. You're going to have a good week, you're going to have a bad week, but I do think activity is really important, and it does measure like how successful you are as an SDR.
One thing I forgot to add that is also very important is no-show rate. That's another thing that we track. So one more thing I forgot to mention.
I want to ask Early before we move on. I didn't really kind of like prep you either on this, so please, off the cuff, if it doesn't feel comfortable, we can remove it. But like both of you talked about kind of like, yes, we're still measuring activity, but we're shifting away to like a revenue model. Why do we think that is? Like obviously everyone likes to talk about spray and praise Brad, and like I agree, it is. But like, why do you think we've moved away from measuring activity as much and focusing more on performance? And Early, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, when things are not going well at a company and revenue isn't there, let's say something goes wrong, the first team that typically gets cut is the SDR team if they're not providing enough value, right? If the SDR team is not sourcing enough revenue, then we're not doing our part. There's so much that we control as an SDR team. Then we pass it off to the account executive team. We can't close the deal essentially, right? But if we're not sourcing the right things, and to John's point, what is the no-show rate? What is the qualification versus disqualification of meetings that we're setting? If we're not effectively doing a good job as, kind of the entry level of sales and the sales process, that we could be the first to go as well. So I do think that tying revenue to anything is really important, because you can book all of these meetings, but if they don't show up, they don't turn into deals, we're not effectively doing our job, and we might need to shift our strategy as well.
John, I imagine it probably, like you said before, I'm sure you do have clients who are like, I just get me 500 dials a day or whatever it is. And maybe the question doesn't apply as directly to you guys as well, but I'm curious your thoughts. Like, have you seen a shift working with a breadth of clients in them saying, if it takes 100 dials, if it takes 200 dials, I don't care. I need X amount of revenue in the pipeline?
Yeah, for us, since we're an agency, at the end of the day, companies are hiring us to get more sales opportunities and make sales and on a return on investment on our service. So that's the end goal. The question is, how do you get there, right? Now, for us, we unfortunately in our deliverables, we have to have certain number of metrics because otherwise they're like, what the hell are you guys doing? So we do have those, but we are having more and more clients that are like, I actually really don't care. You can lower that. What's more important is the quality, or maybe lower the number of parallel dials. Like let's make sure we focus on quality and not just going out to the market and making sure you hit the deliverable you quoted us. So we're finding that more and more.
One more question around we talked about bringing on and finding new talent, but I want to ask you both, and we'll start with you, John, because this is something I imagine turnover is a bit more frequent on your side of things and maybe is internally here at Orum just because of the nature of the business. But how do you focus on retaining talent, like SDRs specifically who are coming into your organization, so that you can minimize the amount of investment you need to do in finding new people? Or is it just the nature of the beast that they're going to last a certain amount of time and it is what it is?
Can't quite pin it down, but we've been surprisingly lucky in a sense. We haven't had too much turnover in terms of reps leaving us. Now, it certainly has happened, but in most cases, we're letting them go for whatever reason. It goes back to the whole thing of like, you think someone's really good, they interview really well, they're well educated, have good resume, but they're not. They just don't have it on the phone. Like here, one example is we recently hired someone who's a professional drummer. He's crushing it. He has no sales experience, but he just like sounds good on the phone and he's doing a good job. But I think one thing that we do is we try to make it as easy as possible for the SDRs so they can just make their dials. So we're pulling all the lists. We're having the majority of the client conversations so we can feed that to them and they can focus on the script and their tone and actually getting the dials in. So we're trying to make it as easy and flexible as possible for them and set a decent work culture where they can work remotely. I think you guys are fully remote too, right, Orum? Yeah,
we are.
So,
yes.
Okay. So they can be flexible, take their kids to school, walk their dog when they want, things like that. So that's helping us retain our SDRs.
Airly, how do you think about this? I know that obviously like career pathing is one suggestion, but like when you find people who are incredibly talented, we want to hold on to them. How do you as a manager think about making sure that they're here for the long haul?
Yeah, I think the SDR role can be very thankless sometimes. And so just a little like, hey, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for that. Or, hey, I saw this really great thing that you did is so important. And validation, I think, goes a long way. And being able to listen to your SDRs, because they do face kind of a lot of issues sometimes, whether it's like a tech thing or a hard conversation or somebody, cursed them out on the phones. Like these poor kids, like sometimes have these things happen to them. And then you're like, oh man, how is this going to affect them? Like being able to listen to them is really important. Get feedback. I think feedback goes both ways. And if you don't have a culture where feedback can be given to you as a leader, you can't make things better. Also money. I will say money definitely moves the needle. So what compensation structure do you have for your SDRs? What spiffs are you putting in front of them to get excited? And also, are you having a collaborative but competitive environment for your SDR where we build each other up, but I am going to be you this week? And I think that that's really important to have. And, to John's point, he hired a drummer. Our top SDR was a former teacher. I feel like former teachers do really well because they don't have to be in a classroom with 30 children screaming their heads off. And they're like, this is better. I call people all day and I get to be at home. So, I think that there used to be this stigma of like, you have to have all this sales experience. But the people that don't have sales experience are almost like really grateful to be here. And they're like, man, I get to do this all day instead of X, Y, and Z. Heck yeah, like hire them. I just hired somebody from Barry's. And the first thing he told me was like, I'm ready to shake up the leaderboards. He's already competitive by nature. So how do you find those kinds of people that not only interview well, but you see coachability too? So I think it's just, like I said, creating collaborative but competitive environment, making sure you're compensating your SDRs and having two-way feedback communication as well.
Two things there. One, I always jokingly tell people, I'm very blunt about this. People are like, what would it take for you to look at another role? I'm like, way more money. absolutely way more money. I'm not that, that's one thing. I will be fully transparent about that. The other thing is having taken Barry's class with my boss, Ting Ting, when I was in San Francisco, that feels like the exact type of person I would want on the phone, honestly. Like a Barry's bootcamp coach. Yeah, I would take that cold call. I love that. That's really good. I want to shift gears a little bit to sales enablement. As a marketer, we're always thinking on our side of things, like how can we provide our SDRs and Airly and our AEs all of the things that they need to succeed. But I would love to hear from you both. And John, we'll start with you on this. You mentioned looking at your reps and how they approach talk tracks, and do they sound robotic and all these different things. I'm curious, and this is super interesting to me because of the breadth of the types of conversations your reps are having. What are the different tools you're using to help them improve their performance, whether it's talk tracks or customer stories? I guess just like walk me through how you empower your team to be as successful as possible.
I think a lot goes into that. Strictly from a tool standpoint, we're using Orum, awesome tool. We have from the beginning. So that's number one. I think you guys are one of the top dialers in the space. Number two, we recently got a AI bot that actually integrates with Orum called Ethereum, and it not only helps with role playing, but it also coaches the calls that actually happened. And for our SDR manager to be able to manage and actually accurately coach 25 SDRs is just close to impossible. So this allows him to kind of know where to dive in and who needs coaching, or is there any common threads that's happening with a particular person or a particular account, so they know where they can jump in and actually coach. The other side of it is like the human aspect, or like the team. So there's plenty of people on our team in terms of the fulfillment. So we have a customer success manager. Like sometimes even myself, I'll help out with certain things, but the SDR manager. And so they're all supportive because we all have the same goal in mind to help them, whether it be around, hey, did you try this? Or hey, the client's saying we could change that. And so, and then also, earlier as you were mentioning, is like, give them some kudos from time to time, like build them up, make them feel good, or also set expectations. Like, what's one thing I like about Orum, by the way, they have the industry standards around connect rates. And so like you can kind of be like, but look, you're like right in where the industry standards are. Like, you shouldn't feel so bad about yourself. Like, this is kind of as expected. And so they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess it's okay that I, only had a few conversations out of X amount of calls. So I think just making them feel good and realize like, hey, this is cold calling's hard. That's why a lot of people either outsource this to us, or as you were saying earlier, it's like a thankless job. So making them feel heard and that they're actually making a difference.
Airly, what do you think? How are you, like, what are you providing to your reps to make sure they are ready to have as high quality conversation as possible when prospects do pick up?
Yeah, I think a really great thing for us is we have Orum. So for us, seeing what objections we're running into, maybe what we're not overcoming, building enablement on that. Or if we're hearing a lot of similar cases on the phones, seeing if we have any case studies to add value that we can speak to on those conversations. Hey, like, so glad you actually brought that up. We had this happen with XYZ company. If we have a case study for it, here were some of the results that they had. And so I think of it as having kind of a bucket of ammunition that they have, that they can have conversations based off of whatever they're running into, and having that in a file for them to control F based off of maybe what scenario they're running into and see what enablement we built for that. Creating a sales development playbook is really important, covering every scenario. And as something comes up, because sales is always changing, adding it to that playbook to make sure we have a play for it, we have a talk track, whatever it is that we need, we have it covered. Because every day is so different for an SDR that we might encounter a situation that we've never ran into. And so maybe we fall on our sword and say, we actually haven't ran into that before, but let me see what I could find you. Like, be very human in that aspect. So I think that's more so important as enablement for your SDRs, and having a hub where they have access to any resources, material, content that they need.
How frequently, not to put you on the spot, do you know how do you have a recommendation on how frequently reps and managers should be looking at that hub? I'm just thinking about like how quickly things change, and if I don't mark on my own calendar to like go back and look at our brand pad or things like that, I will absolutely forget. Do you have a recommendation on how frequently people should be looking into that stuff?
I think like a monthly basis is really great, and weekly based off of maybe scenarios that happen. And that's where we can, reach out to you, Adam, or somebody else on the team and say, hey, we were into this situation. Have you seen this before? So that's great. But even a quarterly basis refresher, going back through that development playbook, I think is really great, because often we see shifts at the quarter. And that's when I really like to do a rehaul of everything if I need to.
I can just say, as the content person here, if you are a sales manager listening to this and you want better materials, as the sales manager, go to your marketing person and say, hey, we need a thing for this. When Airly asks me for stuff, it's like, oh, these are real life examples of things that they have come across. So I don't have to just imagine what might be happening in the field or go find calls to listen to myself. If you go directly to your marketer and say, give me these things, the marketer will say, thank you, I will do that for you. So big recommendation there. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about AI. It feels like every conversation we have about sales development and leading sales development representatives have to have at least a little bit of AI peppered in there. So, John, I'll start with you on this. You mentioned a little bit about like the AI coaching bot that you guys have access to and how that helps facilitate a more streamlined coaching experience. But how are you balancing kind of the expansion of AI with the need for human touch through the sales development experience?
AI is being used in so many ways. And I think, like you even see now, there's like AI SDRs. And I think for the most part, they're doing stuff on email, maybe LinkedIn. I don't think as much on the phones. I actually think isn't it illegal to do AI SDR? Okay. For outbound, that is. We actually have a client that does inbound SDR handling. So I think that email has kind of been overused in the sense. And what that does, it's kind of opened up the door for the phones. And so we've seen the phones convert better actually over time. And we've doubled down on that channel because I don't think as many people are calling. You don't have the AI noise there, not as much. And so that's where we're seeing most of the conversations and work success. Now, you could still use AI to help with scripts and targeting and things like that. I mean, a lot of it, like even the dialer, I'm not an Orum user myself, but the SDRs, I know they get certain information when they connect and there's AI, they're transcribing the calls or summarizing. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. I haven't used it myself, but but the point is that when you're on the call, that you need to be human with them, right? Have a conversation. You can use AI to your advantage, but don't follow a script so closely that you're not actually listening to what the person says and having a conversation. And so that's where I think a human touch comes in, and you can have a legitimate conversation. And if they're not the right fit or whatever, you can ask them why and learn and start, adjust your strategy from that.
Airly, what do you think? How are you guys using, beyond obviously using Orum, to automate the manual processes of a phone call? We know that the Orum team is doing that. Are there other ways that your team is using AI, and how are we balancing it with keeping it human?
Yeah, I think one thing we do is sometimes when we face an objection, we'll put it into like a ChatGPT and be like, what would you respond to this? Or, and kind of get a little bit of framework and then make it your own. I think that's important. Or maybe for like research on a person, you say, hey, I found X, Y, and Z things about this person. Craft me an email. When you feel stuck, it's okay to use that, but you wouldn't just send whatever ChatGPT told you. If I see a rocket ship in my inbox, it's probably AI. You didn't think I could actually do the research. And so I think that's really important, but the phones have been just so successful for our team, and it's going back to being human, right? And we make fun of one of our SDRs because she misspelled a prospect's name in an email, and then I said, send it back and be like, hey, at least it's not AI, like it's a real person who sent you this. And I think that the human approach is so important, and just sprinkling in a little bit of AI help. I don't think it's bad, but when you just solely lean on AI for everything, it makes it so robotic. You're not a real person, and people are buying from people nowadays. More deals are being done at dinner tables, at, happy hours. And so what does that human approach look like? And I say that's the most important thing right now, and being on the phones. Conversions are a lot higher on the phones and emails. I think people are burnt out by that. So just be human and use AI for little things here and there when you feel stuck.
Yeah, we did a report in the summer of 2024 about AI, and I talked to a tech buyer, and he told me, he was like, listen, I understand AI is important and it does help for a lot of instances. He's like, but I will tell you, he's like, if an AI email, if I know it's AI emailing with me or a chatbot, he's like, I am more inclined to blow them off. He's like, if somebody calls me and books a meeting with me, it's human nature for me to feel guilty about not meeting with them. So I'm going to meet with them. And it was just like one of those small things where like, I get people reaching out to me all the time where I can tell it's a bot. I'm like, I'm not answering this. But if I know, like, if John takes a minute to send me a LinkedIn video and my DMs, I said this in a previous episode, like I will respond to those because I see him. It's a real person. And so I agree, like keeping it human. And I do think, I want to ask you guys both this, like, have you seen the market responding to the fact that there's so much AI out there? Like, both of you mentioned the phone being so impactful and, more deals being done kind of person to person. But like, John, are your reps like seeing when you have conversations with people that there's an expectation that you should know more about them because of all the automation available? Or is it just they're genuinely happy to talk to a human being at that point?
No, I mean, we're not experts on our clients. Like we try to understand enough to talk through them, but that we're not there to sell. I'm talking about our use case specifically, but we're not there to sell for our clients. We're there to generate interest and set the meetings so they can do the selling. So we always sometimes will, like, even to our advantage, we'll say like, oh, actually, I'm pretty new to the job. I don't know all the answers to that. What would be best is if I set you up with a call with my manager, Jack, and he'll be able to answer all those questions. So like sometimes it's okay to not know everything about your client. And like, also if you're using Orum, it's not like you can pick and choose who, if you're parallel dialing, it's not like you can pick and choose who's going to pick up. So you do kind of need to think on the fly and have that conversation.
Ariely, have we, saying we, because I'm a part of this team, I don't make cold calls for all that often though. Has your team noticed, like, do people, especially as more and more people don't know who the Orum brand is, like when they answer the phone, do you think there's a greater expectation to understand more about that company because of all the automation? Or do you think it's still pretty like early days in the AI aspect where someone answers the phone, it's still just a cold call, kind of like it's always been?
I feel like it's a little bit different, actually. I think people, when they say, hey, like, what CRM are you using? Or are you still using this? We've heard like, oh, don't you have that information? Or shouldn't you know them already if you did your research? And it's like, hey, we don't have the answers to everything, okay? But I think for a personality aspect, it goes more than just like, hey, I saw you attended this college. It's like, hey, I saw that you're on this podcast and this resonated with me. Or, whatever else may be on there. I think we have that at our fingertips. We can go in and dive into that. And I think that some people maybe do have a little bit of that expectation. I think it depends on who you're talking to, like from a sales manager to a director or VP or CEO, it's going to be a little bit different, right? That's my take on it.
Okay, I want to ask you both something that every organization seemingly is thinking about is moving up market, finding bigger accounts that you can interact with because of the bigger deals. And it's something that, SDRs have to take a slightly different approach. And I'm curious, and Ariely, we'll start with you because we do have some SDRs and some AEs that are calling into larger accounts. How does that shift to wanting to move up market? How does it adjust how SDRs need to approach their work?
Yeah, you would not just call the VP of sales right away. You want to start with a groundswell approach and reaching out fellow SDR to SDR, targeting this account together with your account executive and telling your AE, hey, I'm going to call the team lead and the most like tenured SDR that I can find on their LinkedIn. Give them a call and see what they're struggling with or what insights they can give me. Great. You go do the same thing with the account executive team. And then we go to different departments and see who's involved with what aspect. So then when we're talking to this VP of sales, it's like we almost understand their umbrella and what each component of their business needs and maybe where things are falling short and how we can help, but making it about them and their company rather than one part of their business. I think that's really important. So a groundswell approach is going to be your best avenue, and networking, seeing like maybe who do you have connections with on LinkedIn, who at your company has a connection with them there. I think that's really huge. And then if we see them at maybe an event that we're at, making sure that we introduce ourselves in person and say, hey, like, we're from the Orum team, not sure if you heard of us. So it's a little bit of a different approach there. I don't think you should just immediately go for that VP of sales. Definitely do your research and understand their business a little bit. So it's a little bit different than like an SMB or mid-market team for sure.
John, is this something that your team is experiencing? Are you guys trying to move up market for some of your accounts as well?
It depends on the client, but we certainly have clients that are targeting enterprise, and yeah, it's more complex. That's for sure. I think it's about. I agree with Airly. Like most of the success is going to come from starting lower and moving up. A lot of our clients will come in and they'll be like, "All right, we want to target the C-suite," and it's like Bank of America. I'm like, hey, that's just not going to happen. Sorry. Gotta kind of like, let's start a little bit lower, but a lot of it, like, well, that's the decision maker. And it's like, okay, well, then that's probably not going to happen. But I know, I'm serious. Like people actually do that. They come in as clients expecting to get in touch with like C-level execs of these massive companies. And so typically we'll start off with like a manager or sometimes director and feel it out from there. But we've seen the most success at enterprise starting with manager level and then working our way up from there. Or who is the end user that has the pain point?
Okay, I have one more question for you both, and we've kind of been talking about a lot of this. So you may say like the answer is everything we've been discussing, but I'm curious, like as two people that are leading teams in the trenches that are doing kind of the hard work every single day, what else have you seen that has changed for the SDR experience? And John, I'll start with you on this. Just in general, what over the last, 12, 18, 24 months, what's changed that you have noticed for the SDRs?
I remember, this is maybe a little bit going back further than 18 months, but it wasn't that long ago. It felt like that you could almost just rely on email and it worked. And just the results and the response rates were just so much higher. And I think things have shifted, probably, touching on some of the points we mentioned with AI, and it seems like every tool now has an email aspect to it, and it's a crowded market. And I don't want to say that doesn't work, because it certainly still does, but it's significantly shifted to the phones for us. And there was a time at our company where we didn't even offer cold calling, and now it's the number one service by far, and it's where 80% of our results come from. So that's the shift we've seen.
Airly, what have you seen? You've been here, you were at ZoomInfo before Orum, you've kind of done a ton of this work. What have you seen that has changed?
I feel like social selling is a huge thing. I am like very anti-social media, so LinkedIn and things like that are really hard for me. I will admit it's on my action item to be better at that. But just to see the amount of SDRs that are like, yeah, I'm a social seller, I'm on LinkedIn and messaging people. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's significantly shifted. And that's even brand new for me. Also why I'm trying to work on that as well. So that's news to me. But I will still say like the phones are obviously the most important channel, just as John mentioned. But I also think that the space is very overcrowded. It almost seems like every day there's a new competitor that's hitting the market, or there's a new shiny tool, or a lot of companies are going wide with product and offering multiple product services. And so that's a little bit different from when we were, SDRs. I feel like there was these 5 companies that offered this service, and now we're seeing a little bit of different market shift in that. So being more competitive is really difficult. And how do you set yourself aside from these competitors and brand and people, I think is really important. But I also think that people are buying more from people nowadays. Like it's not a need because they have 5 other companies that they can go to. You're not the only company that offers a solution. So how are you winning, not just based off what shiny tools you have, but the way that you treat people and their experience when first time an SDR reaches out to you. So that's my hot take on that.
I can confirm, by the way, it's not just talk for the podcast. The day we're recording this, Airly and I literally have a meeting later to talk about LinkedIn. So she is taking it very seriously. I really appreciate both of your times. Obviously, Airly works here at Orum. I will put a link to her LinkedIn in the show notes. But John, before we go, tell people a little bit about Level Up Leads and how they can learn more about your company, and if they're interested in getting some outbound help, the best way to get in contact with you all.
Yeah, the best way is go to the website, levelupleads.io, or you can check me out on LinkedIn at John Karsant. I don't think there's any others out there. What we do is we're a sales development agency from start to finish, basically setting up appointments in your calendar so you have more selling opportunities.
And I will make sure all of that is in the show notes as well. Arely, John, thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.